Hi there. Welcome to a special video just for you. This video has the sound of gentle rain, perfect for helping you fall asleep. Do you have trouble sleeping or just want to relax? Let the soft rain sounds help you feel calm and cozy. Find a comfy spot, press play, and let the soothing rain help you drift off to dreamland. Enjoy your peaceful sleep. And like, share, and subscribe Haunting Whispers. I used to bite my nails. When I was little, it started. My small, weak nails were just too easy to remove. I could get lost in another world biting them off until eventually all that was left were jagged, bloodied stubs. It was a horrible habit that followed me into my teenage years and became a point of contention for my mother. I used to bite mine, you know? Then your aunt got married and I used this awful stuff that you painted on, and it tasted so bad it put me off biting them for good. I'll get you some if you like. Then she'd tap her beautiful, strong, natural nails on the table in a show of prowess. I'd look down and hate my jagged stubs. It was unconscious. I didn't even know I was doing it until my exposed nail bed was raw and sore. I tried the stuff. It tasted awful, and still I persevered. I'd never have nice nails. This went on for years, even as I got older and more aware of how I looked. Eventually, I left school and got a job at a mental health charity. And the sudden injection of money spurred my vanity into finally finding a solution to the nail biting. My first set of acrylics were gorgeous, so long they could poke out an eye and filed to deathly point. Gold glitter flicked across them. I loved them so much, it was like the biting was forgotten. I got my nails done every month after that. I didn't give my natural nails a chance to breathe for years, and I couldn't bite through the thick acrylics even if I wanted to. It was the perfect solution, and it pleased my mother. It's so nice to see you being a little bit girly, my beautiful daughter. She'd smile, and it would melt my heart. She'd always wanted a little glamorous mini-me, and instead she got a chubby, nerdy goth who hung out with boys. But I was girly. It was a common ground. Without real bills, as my wages grew, I found new ways to satisfy my need to present myself nicely. The nails stayed groomed, and I got really into makeup, collecting every viral palette on the internet, perfecting highlighting techniques so I could glow like a disco ball. I loved it. It was so much fun, but it was a gateway into the habit that would come to ruin my life and lead me here, asking for help. I'm getting ahead of myself, but my heart is beating so fast, my chest might burst. It started with the structured Instagram brow. I know, not the most threatening concept in the world, but for me it led to my greatest love, tweezers. I took so much joy in plucking. I'd pluck every hair that seemed to stray from the perfect crisp line I'd created. And I'll be honest, I even quite enjoyed the pain. Got to a point where all I had was the inner half on one of my brows because I'd decided the tail didn't grow right and I'd draw it myself every day. And getting those short hairs, the little prickly ones that grew back, just felt so fucking satisfying. It wasn't like nail biting. People didn't see it as a bad habit. It was just zealous plucking reminiscent of the 90s and their pencil-thin browed generation. In fact, if any friends or family caught me without my perfectly drawn eyebrows and spotted the one that was a tuft, it became a running joke. It was funny. For a while, nothing really changed. I'd stand in the mirror, tweezers gripped firmly between my manicured claws, plucking to my heart's content. I got to keep a weird little habit, and the world saw a nicely groomed young girl. Everyone was a winner. I found the love of my life in that time. I say I found him, but really he was there all along. I fell in love with a boy I'd been friends with for over a decade. We had such a history together, and when it finally took a romantic turn, it just felt so right. We'd get high together watching movies in his bed, just smiling about the world. I wish I could say it was all blissful, but his living situation wasn't great. His mother, an alcoholic with a shouty partner, created a hostile environment for him to live in, and one I didn't love visiting. Most young couples who move in together as quick as we did are doomed to fail. But we'd known each other so long it made sense to get him out of there. So my mother cried as I moved into my first flat. I missed home, but my mother and I were so close I wasn't scared. I had the man of my dreams next to me every night. I kept the love of makeup, but not the disposable income that I'd had with living with a parent. I'd become so accustomed to keeping up with the limited edition releases that the makeup won in a heartbeat. And soon, acrylic nails monthly were just out of my budget. Didn't go back to nail biting. My natural nails were weak after years of extensions and snapped off easily, though they seemed to maintain a normal, short length on their own. Instead, the plucking really took hold. My tailless brow had become nothing more than a stub to show me where to start drawing it in the morning, and the other was greatly thin. My boyfriend would laugh at the little tuft. But around that time, the chin hair made its first appearance. Don't lie to yourselves, ladies. We've all been there. You stroke your face and suddenly feel a sharp little thick hair that makes you feel as if you're about to grow a lustrous beard. That got plucked too. Every stray hair I deemed too thick or long on my face did. Eventually, my tweezing began to irk my boyfriend. Maybe he realized it was more than just grooming. I don't even think I did back then. Plucking them, you've got barely any eyebrow left. I'm gonna hide your tweezers. Thought he was being helpful. I know it came from a place of love, and by this point, the structured Instagram brow had been phased out in favor of the fluffy, full ones that were on trend. I couldn't follow that trend, though. There wasn't enough hair left. So when he took the tweezers, I really thought it would help. When I discovered that I could pull out those prickly little hairs that grew back and irritated me to touch, with nothing but my own fingernails, it was a revelation. I'd catch one in the mirror growing outside of the designated tuft I'd left behind, and I'd grip it hard between my thumb and index finger, pulling until it came out. You don't need tweezers. We moved a couple of times and I left my job to manage a restaurant. Soon I'd stopped caring about my appearance altogether. Between the hours I was working, the comfort levels with my boyfriend, and the lack of disposable income as our bills grew, I stopped buying all the makeup. The only thing I still did was draw my eyebrows on, because I had to. A year into that job, the lockdown hit. I realized just how much I hated restaurant work, so I quit. A week before they introduced furlough. I knew I'd been an idiot, but I was grateful I never had to go back, even if money was tight. We couldn't go anywhere anyway, right? I'm almost ashamed to say I loved lockdown. I know that sounds horrific, but I'm a homebody, and being at home all that time was so good for me. After years of not having much of a break, I took up writing. I'd been playing around writing stories for a while, but never really taken it seriously, and lockdown gave me the opportunity to get lost in my characters. My tailless eyebrow even started to grow back. The time that would have been spent nail biting, tweezing, pulling out my eyebrows was spent in fantasy worlds. But when the world returned to normality, those fantasy worlds were shattered. I went to work for a care company, thinking it would be a good return to my original industry, but it wasn't. It was depressing, poorly run, and sparked anxieties in me I never knew I had. I started having panic attacks, and that's when the eyebrow pulling turned to picking. By the time I left that job, a quivering mess mid-breakdown, I could barely finish the book a publisher had asked me to write. That shitty job robbed me of the joy of realizing one of my life's greatest dreams. I wish I got to enjoy it more. At this point, all I had left was a tuft for either eyebrow. At some point, through the stress, I'd pulled out the feeble tail of the other one, leaving me looking permanently surprised unless they were painstakingly painted on. It's hard to find the will to draw them when you're depressed. Suddenly, it wasn't so funny anymore. Can't you just let them grow back? You need to leave them alone? Have you tried getting rid of your tweezers? I'd get those questions all the time. I was too ashamed to admit I was pulling them. It was unconscious, just like the nail biting had been. I'd sit there in the evening, watching mind-numbing TV, high as I could get myself, picking at the prickly little hairs desperate to grow back, and that fucking beard hair that tried every time I picked it out. I'd become so fixated that I'd be trying to pull them before there was anything to grip, and would make myself bleed digging at them. Eventually, I came through the crux of the mental health crisis, got a new job in a sales environment with a load of great people my own age, and for a while, I was actually happy. I hadn't managed to get back to writing, but I was healing. Everything healed, but my eyebrows. I've been there for almost 3 years, and all that time I never stopped picking. It wasn't as bad as when I made myself bleed, but it never went away. I just hid it with drawn-on, structured Instagram browse. That leads me here. Things got stressful. It doesn't matter how that isn't actually relevant anymore. I'm explaining I was stressed, so you know why the picking got worse again. I don't know what time I started this evening, but my boyfriend is on a night shift. I'm sat here, alone watching the telly, and I must have started pulling and digging. I noticed when I pulled out the bit of metal. It resembled a hair, but it was thick and coiled like a tiny spring. Terrified, I pulled again, and there was another. When I run my fingers along my eyebrow line, they're everywhere. Thick little fucking metal springs. I feel them stretch as I pull them, and they resist detaching from my face. There's one in place of the chin hair, too. I can feel them everywhere. I thought I'd really lost it, but there's a pile of these little metal springs right in front of me. They're real, and every time I pull one grows. There's blood caked around my nails, and I can feel it on my face. I've scoured the internet, paralyzed to my bed, too scared to look in a fucking mirror, and I can't find anything like this. All I found was you guys. You seem to go through some weird shit. I'm hoping one of you, just one of you, knows what's going on here. I don't think I have long. They're growing. They've formed a curtain now springing down from my eyebrows, almost covering my eyes. It doesn't matter how quick I pull, they always grow quicker. Fuck, please help me. Maybe things would be better if I kept biting my nails. But as that dark tail fades into the shadows, another chilling story emerges, one that will leave you questioning reality itself. I worked as a professional foreigner in China, and the job is even stranger than it sounds. With billions of people on the planet, there's a job for everything. Face feelers and dog food testers, professional mourners, armpit smellers, the list is endless. Although I didn't sniff armpits for a living, my job title was just as strange. I worked as a professional foreigner. China's economy has grown massively over the years, and they are always looking for foreign investors, but they also want to attract non-nationals to work in their ever-growing tech industry, and that is where I come in. My job as a professional foreigner is to look like a foreign professional. I am foreign and a professional, but you can think of me as an actor. I get paid to attend board meetings for companies I don't work for. This is when the board meeting is showcasing their company to foreign investors, and I'm the token white guy, made it up the ladder in the company. I appear in a lot of corporate videos for different companies to smile while I sit by a computer and look like a productive member of the workforce. I get hired to go to corporate dinners and parties to make new foreigners feel comfortable when they are new to a company. The list of duties as a professional foreigner is endless. My tools consist of an empty briefcase, a laptop I use for checking my emails for job notifications, and a suit. I loved my job until my title as a professional foreigner started to get a bit extreme. China isn't known for high standards of ethics in the workforce, and for most Chinese and foreign workers, the work can be a miserable and grueling existence. Long hours and low pay can cause low morale within companies, which makes people less productive. For my next gig, I was hired to be an executive working high up for a tech company. When I arrived with my empty briefcase and laptop, they brought me to a large room which was filled with many Chinese and American workers that all looked like they hadn't slept in weeks. They brought me up onto a stage. At first, I thought I was going to give a motivational speech. As I stood there, the CEO of the company arrived on stage with two large-looking men. At first, they started shouting at me in Chinese, calling me lazy and stupid. I mean, the gig paid well, but when the large men pulled out sticks, I thought, I didn't sign up for this. They began beating me in front of a terrified crowd, who were told this was going to happen to them if they didn't start meeting their quotas. After beating me relentlessly for 15 minutes, they fake fired me and dragged me off stage to add to the dramatics. I didn't doubt that the theatrics worked. For me, it was a terrifying ordeal. For a moment, I genuinely thought they would beat me to death. A few days passed before I got an email for another job. The company was vague in its description. All I had to go on was its name, Humane Biotech. When I arrived at the building, I had to check twice that I was at the right location. The rundown office block didn't scream tech and resembled more of a sweatshop. First thing that hit me when I walked in the doors was the smell. It was a mix of chemicals with the staleness of rotten wood. I walked down a narrow, dimly lit corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls lined with rows of cubicles packed with people hunched over computers. The room buzzed, a hum of machines and the low murmur of voices, but there was an eerie tension in the air. I finally reached a small office where a man in a wrinkled suit greeted me with a forced smile. He didn't look me in the eyes as he handed me a contract. I skimmed through it. The terms were vague, and the pay was unusually high. Something about this didn't feel right. I was shown to a glass-walled room overlooking the main work area. My role, I was told, was to sit there and observe, with no interaction with the workers and no involvement in the operations. Just sit and be seen. As I sat there with my empty briefcase and powered-down laptop, I watched the workers below me. Their faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow. It became clear that they weren't just overworked, they were terrified. Now and then I noticed one of them glance up at me with a mix of hope and desperation. As I sat there, the man in the wrinkled suit came back and asked me to follow him. We walked up a flight of stairs to the second floor and past an office filled with ringing telephones that went unanswered. He brought me to another office and sat me down at a table and handed me a load of documents and a pen. "You sign these. You are a company executive," he demanded. Suddenly, two large men stepped into the room. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me when I recognized the two men as the ones who beat me relentlessly at my last gig. "If you want to get paid, you sign these now." One of the men pulled out a gun and pointed it at my head. All that was going through my head was the thought of getting out of there alive, so I signed whatever they wanted me to sign. When I was finished, the two men picked me up and dragged me from the office and up another flight of stairs to the third floor. Men in surgical gowns and face masks roamed a large room filled with surgical beds. When I realized what was happening, I tried to run. The two men overpowered me. As I struggled for my life, a man with a camera asked one of the men to prop me up by one of the beds. He began taking pictures with me in the frame as a doctor removed the organs from someone strapped to the bed. He brought me from bed to bed, making sure to get a picture of me standing next to the unfortunate soul that was having their organs harvested. Each time it happened, I thought I was next. But when they were done, they brought me downstairs and told me I could go home. Back at my apartment, I was a trembling mess. I eventually gathered myself together enough to pick up the phone. Just as I was about to dial the police, someone started banging on my door. At first, I thought it was the people from the company coming to finish me off. I slowly opened my front door, and fear turned to confusion as the people introduced themselves as detective. When I asked them what they wanted, they pulled out a load of files. "Mr. Johnson, are you the chief executive at a firm called Humane Biotech?" firmly asked. He then proceeded to pull out the pictures of me standing next to the doctors as they illegally removed people's organs. "Can you come with us and answer a few questions?" Just when you thought it was safe to relax, another unsettling tale is waiting to grip your deepest fears. Depth minding. A couple of years ago, I was dating a woman named Lynn. She was deeply enthusiastic about alternative medicine. It was such a strange obsession. In every other aspect, she was insightful and critical. Hell, she was a paralegal. She just had this one blind spot that I could never figure out, and it was a big part of her life. We were together for 2 years. During that time, she had me try all kinds of strange treatments and experiences. Things like acupuncture, spirit healing, crystals, Reiki, rolfing, and even a seance. I may or may not have been asked to do ayahuasca. I went along with it because I cared deeply for her, but the cracks in our relationship had started to show. Turned out, we wouldn't last in the long run. But I don't want to talk about that relationship. I want to talk about this one treatment she took me to, and how it has shaped the life I'm living today. It's a bit complicated. I'm going to talk about step minding. It was an early Minnesota morning, in the last session that Lynn and I would attend as a couple. We pulled into a nondescript parking lot, and Lynn led me by the hand. We'd had an insane fight that morning about something I can barely remember. I think it was the order you put in your yogurt when eating muesli. Of course you put the muesli in first, right? It's like cereal. We entered a stale waiting room. The AC must have been off for days. I could taste the air. The only other person there was a short, balding man who spoke to us in a vaguely European accent, barely looking up from his iPad. "Stevenson's?" he asked. "Overexposure is room 4. No, that's not us," I said. "We're..." Right, sorry," he sighed. "Wrong day." He tapped the screen a couple of times and nodded. "Depth minding, couples treatment. Still room 4. Thank you." He wandered off, and I noticed he didn't have any shoes on. I pointed it out to Lynn, who elbowed me. She thought I was being judgmental. I just thought it was strange. I didn't want to start anything. She vehemently disagreed with my assessment. As always, we walked up to room 4. The door was already open. It was a plain windowless room with a small coffee table surrounded by 4 basic office chairs. There was a vase with a single blue sunflower. There was a naked light bulb overhead with nothing covering it. Floor was covered in a plain gray carpet. There was a little note on the door that urged us to take off our shoes. Lynn just smiled at me, as if this explained everything. I rolled my eyes. We sat down across from one another and waited. Didn't take that long before a woman wandered in. She was in her 40s, wearing a sort of knitted, white wool kaftan. She had a combed-back, flat, Elvira-looking hairdo and covered herself in rings, chains, and bangles. She shook our hands, smiling widely. "I'm Dr. Bogan," she assured us, "but please call me Jane." I wasn't feeling all too confident about what we were about to do. Jane described the procedure. Step-minding was a way to connect to one another in a new way, giving a better understanding of what it's like to walk a mile in their shoes. There were a couple of rules to remember before we started. For example, once the treatment started, we couldn't get up from our chairs. If we did, we'd get horribly nauseous. Also, we had a sort of safety noise. If someone were to snap their fingers 3 times in a sequence, that'd trigger a failsafe that brought us right back. All in all, it seemed odd, but not like nefarious. Then we began. Jane rhythmically snapped her fingers, like someone tapping their feet to a slow song. She spoke in a monotone voice, asking us to look down. "Look at your feet," she said. "Imagine the feeling of walking, the way your muscles contract and your knee bend. Think of how it makes you feel, and imagine the sound you think your body makes." I don't remember the exact wording of what she told us next, but I remember how it made me feel. Without moving, we were supposed to imagine standing up, stepping across and through the coffee table, and sitting down in the chair of the person on the other side, our spirit passing through them, occupying the same space. We were to imagine looking at ourselves through the eyes of the other. There was a breathing exercise following the rhythm of her finger snapping. We joined our breaths, and Jane made us focus on each part of our body, leading from our toes up to the top of our heads. She called it materializing. We kept our eyes on our feet. Except, slowly, they weren't my feet anymore. "Now look," Jane said. "Look at yourself." I was looking down at Lynn's feet, but not through my eyes. I have a hard time describing the first sensation of step-minding. Jane's finger snapping stopped, and all of a sudden I was looking up at, well, myself. I was sitting in Lynn's chair. I was, for all intents and purposes, experiencing the world as Lynn. I was Lynn. My hands were smaller, more delicate. I was colder, and my clothes were uncomfortable. Smell and taste felt different, and I had this gnawing hunger in the back of my stomach. My back ached, and I could feel my long hair reaching halfway down my back. I wasn't just looking at Lynn's feet. I was Lynn. I can barely remember what I did. We talked and touched each other's hands, reassuring one another that we were actually experiencing this. Lynn was repeating the same thing over and over. "That's me," she said. "I'm looking at me. You're me. I'm you." We had a long discussion. I could feel air reverberating through my throat in a strange way. I spoke with Lynn's voice, and it made my neck strain. I had to settle myself in her body, and there were so many details that just didn't click. It was so hard to focus on what was being said when all I could think about was the way my earrings swung back and forth when I moved my head. But after about an hour, Jane snapped her fingers 3 times, and I was back in my chair in the blink of an eye. This is how I realized I was short-sighted. Lynn's vision had been perfect. I also felt bigger, heavier. Her world felt so different from mine. And while it didn't explain our disagreements, it gave me some insights into just how different we really were. I made a note to get new glasses. Still reeling from the experience, Lynn and I thanked Dr. Bogan and stepped out. We had a strange, disoriented talk in the parking lot and broke up. It was oddly amicable, as if we both understood that we were fundamentally incompatible. That was it. No drama, just, that's it. I thought about that day for weeks. It was so surreal. I mean, how do you go from a literal out-of-body experience and back to work on Monday morning? You can't pretend that nothing happened. I wanted to understand it. Really understand it. I'd been to countless nonsensical treatments with Lynn, but this one had been the real deal. There was no denying it, even though I desperately tried to. A couple of weeks later, I returned to Dr. Bogan on my own. I wanted to talk to her about it. The science behind it, how it functioned, how it was performed, anything. And of course, how had I never heard of step-minding before? I met her on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. She sat me down and had her assistant offer me a cup of coffee. She explained it as calmly as she could. It was complicated, but essentially she explained it as something based on Raskian identity theory. The transfer of thought pattern through vocal mediation, exchanging vibrations and adapting electrical patterns in the brain. Every word sounded like nonsensical pseudoscience, but it didn't change the fact of what I'd experienced. Jane offered me a quid pro quo. She had a couple of patients who could benefit from a step-minding session, but she needed a neutral third party to act as the recipient. I seemed to be a good fit. I was skeptical, but she had a little bonus to sweeten the deal. She'd pay me a handsome sum of cash for each session as a kind of consultation fee. I was a bit hesitant, but I agreed. 1 week later, I sat in on a session with Jane and one of her patients. The patient had a dissociative issue and needed a step-minding session to alleviate a strange obsession she seemed to have with what sounded like a houseplant. I didn't pay too much attention. I was nervous. I couldn't figure out why. Maybe it was the thought that what I'd experienced was real and how that would force me to change the way I viewed the world. If a thing like step-minding exists, who's to say there aren't ghosts or wizards? So I sat down with this stranger, and Jane started snapping her fingers. "Now look," she began. "Look at yourself." Jane used the same words, the same sequence, the same rhythm, stepping out of my body and into another, but the difference was palpable this time. Lynn had been calm and collected, but this woman was the opposite. Sitting in her body, my pulse was higher, my legs were shaking and my breathing was shallow. I was physically exhausted, but mentally wired. Thoughts rushing 100 different ways at once, and I didn't even know why. A single second in that body, looking across my table back at myself, and I could tell they were a troubled person. I was to sit there for a while as Jane had a discussion with the other patient. Instinctively, I stood up to leave the room, to give them privacy, but I had to sit back down. My head started spinning as all these unfamiliar muscles reacted to my input, and I couldn't get very far. Perhaps the sitting down rule was there for a good reason. I sat there, trying to calm down, while the two of them had a discussion. I was asked to put on headphones for a bit, and I didn't mind. It was hard hearing anything through my pounding pulse anyway. As the session came to an end, Jane snapped her fingers, and I was back in my chair. My heart rate was slower. I wasn't shaking. I was nervous, but compared to the other patient, I was an obelisk of relaxation. For a moment, looking across the table, I could see her taking a deep breath. She was still shaking, but not as much as when we started. Perhaps that session gave her a new perspective on things. As the patient left, I got a moment to talk to Jane alone. I explained to her that if we had wheelchairs instead, the other patient could be rolled out during the session. That'd be more effective than using headphones. She really liked that idea and suggested we'd try it at the next session, which inadvertently answered my next question. There was going to be more sessions. I worked on and off with Dr. Bogan for a couple of months. I usually did about 3 to 5 sessions per month, netting me a bonus income of about $400 per session. Jane ended up getting 2 wheelchairs and having her assistant, Jonathan, wheel me out while she had a conversation with the other patient. I grew accustomed to it and started to enjoy the sensation. It's sort of a pleasant ego death. Feel more connected to the world. It was becoming a steady source of secondary income. Taking an afternoon off work to get paid for something that I ultimately enjoyed? Yeah, not a bad deal. Over the upcoming weeks, I got a couple more opportunities. I joined Jane on a couple of out-of-town sessions, meeting some clients she was following up on. Mostly folks who need privacy for one reason or another. Folks with all kinds of strange afflictions. I could probably write a book about those people alone. Coming back home, Jane contacted me about doing a couple of sessions where she wasn't personally involved. I was also asked to be the guide a couple of times, seeing as how I'd step-minded so many times and could recite the guiding words by heart. The pay was more than doubled, so I agreed. I had 3 guiding sessions on my own, one with a hippie couple who wanted to experience a sort of intimacy. Let's just leave it at that. Another session with 2 brothers performing a trust exercise. The third one was a group of college kids who wanted to debunk the whole thing, and they left sort of befuddled. All in all, things were going well. Then I got a call about being a neutral third party. I was going to perform a switch with a patient, but this time, Jane wasn't involved at all. The customer went straight to me. It was a group of people who contacted me. They described it as their dad having a disorder and that they wanted to try step-minding to sort of reset him. They'd arranged their own guide, so they just needed me as a neutral third party, someone who wouldn't freak out about the process, as it might take a couple of hours to get through to him. It would be my longest session yet, but the pay was good, and I tried a lot of things up until that point. I was ready. I met the client, Harold, at his home in southern St. Cloud. Big place, 3 floors, gated property with both a pool and a tennis court, modern architecture and heated floor tiles. The guide for the evening was a cheery woman in her 40s. She gave off a bit of a college professor kind of vibe. Apart from the client himself, there was a group of 4 other people who seemed to be close relatives. And of course, there was Harold himself, the man I was supposed to work with. I was introduced to the others, who introduced themselves as friends and family. We hurried into the living room where a space had been prepared. We were all seated as a group. The guide had prepared everything and offered me a reassuring smile. She took our hands, something that Jane usually didn't do. "I just want to make sure we're all feeling good about this," she said. "We good? We good?" I nodded. "We're good," Harold agreed, and with that, the session was on. The guide snapped her fingers, lowered her voice, and took us down the mental road and across the table. By then, I knew the process. The right words with the right cadence, the right time. I sunk back in my chair, looking at my feet, and felt the world shift. After a while, my shoes looked different. They were nicer, and my pants fit me better. Slowly, I started to feel the reality of my borrowed body. The various aches and pains, the thinning hair, the wrinkles on my cheek when I blinked. I'd aged about 30 years in a couple minutes, and it would take some time adjusting. Looking up and seeing myself in the opposite chair, I got this anxious sting in my chest. The thought crossed my mind. What if I never returned? The guide excused herself and left. She'd done her job. The rest was up to Harold and his associate. But as soon as I heard the front door close, the air in the room shifted. Harold was sitting there, looking like me, stretching his arms. The others joined us, making a circle. One of Harold's associates, a young woman who'd introduced herself as Hope, spoke to the both of us. She could easily have been his daughter. "How you feeling?" she asked. "Everyone okay?" "Yeah," I nodded. "You do what you gotta do." "So this works?" Harold asked. This is it? It's done?" "It's done." Hope smiled. Harold pulled out a gun, a well-polished revolver. I was the only one who reacted, flinching at the sight of it. The others didn't seem to care. I didn't know what to do. Should I be scared? If so, why was no one reacting? "So we just cut the cord then," he said. "And we're good to go." "Wait, what are you?" They were tricking me. They put me in that old body and had no intention of putting me back. I held up my hand and snapped my finger 2 times. Before the 3rd snap, I had a gun pushed against the back of my head. "That won't help," Hope said. "We'll just kill you when you're you again." It's hard to describe what I felt in that moment. The fear was real, but there was also a longing to go back. Being out of your own body is like sleeping outside. You feel exposed and maladjusted. If you know it's just for a while, it's not that bad. But if there's a chance you can't go back, it becomes terrifying, like getting lost in the woods. That's not even counting for the primal terror you feel from having a gun pointed at you. Harold seemed a bit confused, which made me realize that no one had explained the rules to him, that we couldn't get up, and that 3 snaps of a finger would cancel the effect. I got the impression that he thought this was somehow permanent. Looking at him, I could see a worry spread across his face. My face. You said this was permanent, he said, looking at Hope. It is, as long as you don't do 3 finger snaps. How's that going to work when we cut him off? You're going to have to make sure you're never around someone who snaps their fingers, Harold. He smiled. That's not too much, is it? Do I have to remind you that I got the tapes to put you away? Harold snarled back. And that if anything were to happen to me, you're done? Nothing's going to happen, Harold. Hope chuckled. Look, you're right there, safe and sound. She pointed at me. It was as if a light turned on in Harold's eyes. He was being double-crossed, just like me. In a desperate moment, he raised his handgun at me. I recoiled so hard that I fell out of my chair, feeling my heart skip a beat. Cold sweat spread across my arms, clinging to the thin inner fabric of Harold's expensive blazer. But there was no gunshot, just a click. His gun was empty. That click was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I came crumbling down to the floor, feeling the effects of the first rule, don't get up. I was immediately nauseous. I felt like a bobblehead as my head went one way and my body another. I collapsed in a pile, trying to find the magic number of blinks to make the world stop spinning. You'll never get past the safety checks, Harold screamed. You'll never get the backups. It's all fingerprinted. Hope sighed. Fingerprinted, biocoded, voice checked. Sorry. A man raised his arm. There was no second click. Instead, there was a bang. I looked up with my ears ringing, watching a reflection of my dead self on the other side of the coffee table. Bullet to the brain. Nothing but blank eyes looking back at me. My face didn't look dead. It just looked sort of tired, like I was sleepy. I was expecting that face to blink. That blink never came. Blood pooled at the corner of the mouth, running down from the open wound at the temple. They pulled me up and dragged me over to Harold's workstation. They used my hand to log in. I had to do a voice recognition check. Hope's associates went through 2 laptops and a smartphone. While they did, Hope sat down across from me. My head was still swimming. We're gonna need you, she said, and as long as you play along, you will be fine. But if you fuck with me... She snapped her fingers twice. Ice filled my veins as I gripped my seat. I can't imagine something good would happen if we tried this, she said, lowering her voice. So how about we just really, really pay attention? She explained it to me. I was done for. Anyone in her crew could snap their fingers 3 times, and I'd be done. This also meant I couldn't perform step minding again, as you need a rhythmic finger snapping as part of the process. She explained the plan. They needed Harold alive to slowly transfer his company shares to someone else without it looking all too suspicious. They needed access to his files, both immediate and over a longer time. They explained that they needed me around to make it appear that everything was fine. In return, I'd get to live in this amazing place with whatever comforts I could ask for the rest of my days. But if I slipped up, snap, snap, snap. Done. Fade to black. It was so surreal, watching them wrap up my own body in black plastic. Men in tailored blazers scrubbing the floors and walls with bleach. Hope sitting across from me, rubbing her fingers together. Where do you think you'll go? He asked. If I snap my fingers, where do you think you'll go? I don't know, stuttered. I don't. Maybe you'll be fine, he shrugged. Maybe there's something nice and warm on the other side. Or maybe the snapping doesn't even work anymore. Wanna try? No. No, she smiled. No, you don't. You're smarter than that. And maybe you're not the gambling type. She tapped the barrel of the gun on Harold's mahogany desk. You can have all the parties you want. You got a big bank account, she sighed. But maybe be careful about inviting musical people. Those who stomp their feet or snap their fingers. And that was that. I was left there. I had keys to a place I didn't know. Phone full of numbers I didn't recognize. I just stood there in the chlorine-smelling house of a stranger. I didn't know what to feel. Ever since I first started step-minding, I had never considered this. was unreal. I remember looking down at my own hand, not being sure if I could snap myself out of it. What would happen? Over time, I got used to the nausea. Nowadays, Don, I can walk around like anyone else, but I have to avoid crowds. Can't risk hearing those three snapped. I watch videos with the sound off and subtitles on. I only watch movies after checking the soundtrack, making sure there's no snapping in the songs. Radio is out of the question. You never know where you might hear it. And even if you do, does it work hearing it through a TV or in a song? Would you risk it? I won't. I can't. I don't think I can ever adjust. I've thought about contacting people from my old life, but I wouldn't know where to begin. How do you explain this? I have to be careful not to draw any attention to myself or hoping her cronies might return. And if they do, well, I don't know how far I can push my luck. I mean, I'm comfortable. Harold made close to 6 figures a month on passive income. I've learned most things about his life. He never married, he has no children, and most of his contacts are passing acquaintances at best. He was a lonely man, and now, that's me. I've changed a couple of names in this story as to not make it too obvious who I am. Then again, even if I said it outright, I can't imagine it would matter. No one's going to believe this. How do you convince someone that you're really someone else? Just sounds schizophrenic. I spend most of my days considering my options. Thought about destroying my hearing. As a safety measure, yes, going deaf is awful. But you have no idea what it's like living with the thought that a sound that can be done at any time by anyone can kill you. It's exhausting, and you end up isolating yourself. So I'm typing this out on a fancy laptop on a mahogany desk. I'm Harold now, screaming into the void that I used to be someone else. I'm sipping on a drink from a glass with my initials on it. And when I go to bed tonight, I will do the same thing I do every night. I will take a long look at myself. I got better vision now. Harold isn't short-sighted, but I can't look at myself. I'm not there anymore. It's just Harold. As the night grows darker, yet another mysterious story unfolds, drawing you deeper into the unknown. Someone at the airport asked me to watch their suitcase. I never should have agreed. I'm not sure if this is the best place to post this. There will probably be a lot of YTA comment. But let me be a cautionary tale against being a good Samaritan and helping strangers with luggage. And while I know my actions will probably disgust a lot of people, before you criticize, I want you to think, really think, if you do any different than me. So, I was at airport baggage claim when a woman asked me to watch her bag. Promise you'll keep this for me until I get back, she said. I promised her I'd look after it, laughing a little, as she seemed so anxious, as if she was worried I'd abandon it and leave it for someone to steal. The woman thanked me profusely and left, presumably to pee, I thought, given how quick she went. She never came back. The bag had no tag and no name, just a ribbon tied on the handle. I kept it with me and waited a whole half hour for her return, but after 45 minutes, well, this was ridiculous. I left the suitcase with the rest of the unclaimed luggage, figuring it would find its way to her eventually. I was wrong. When I got home, the suitcase was there in the entryway. I stared as I closed the front door behind me. Weird, right? How did it get here? Vague thoughts flitted through my head that the airport somehow delivered it. Maybe they saw me sitting with it and assumed it was mine. The suitcase was a dark gray-green, one of those big clamshell ones with sturdy fabric around the zipper, a lacy ribbon tied on the handle, and no labels at all. Not even a flight barcode sticker. Next day, I returned it to the airport. But when I got home, it was back in my house, in my bedroom, stationed beside my other luggage that I'd yet to unpack. This was getting disturbing. Who brought it back here? How did they know where I lived? If this was a prank, it'd gone too far. I grabbed the suitcase and wheeled it out to the dumpster in the alley and tossed it in. But a few hours later, it was back. By then, I'd unpacked from my trip, and my own luggage was deep in my closet. The green suitcase was just sitting there, as if waiting to be unpacked also. I drove it out to a dumpster across town. It was back when I got home. I took it to Goodwill and donated it, but it returned again. Each time it got back, it felt heavier. As the days passed, I started having nightmares about the suitcase. I'd close my eyes, and as soon as I was asleep, I'd feel the clamshell around me as if I were all folded into it, my limbs scrunched, my lungs suffocating. I'd try to breathe, but the air was stale and I was smothered. Finally, I'd panic and wake up and see the suitcase in my room. In addition to getting heavier, it was also getting stinkier. At first, I thought it was from being thrown into the dumpster, but no. This was a different odor, and it got worse over time. It reeked like someone had hunted a deer and packed it in there and left it. And it leaked, a sort of foul, dark liquid that dripped into the carpet and left a stain. I decided to change tactics and video the suitcase in hopes of catching whoever kept returning it to me. My parents had a pet cam for their dogs, so I asked them to take care of the suitcase for me, and I made sure to place it in their living room in sight of the camera so that when it disappeared, I'd be able to pinpoint how and when. A day passed. 2. When I checked the footage of my parents' pet cam, the suitcase was still there. Then they called me up. Would I take my suitcase back? It was taking up space and stinking up their living room. I retrieved the suitcase and back at home, put it in the garage and installed a camera to monitor it. It stayed in the garage. Thank goodness, because the smell was truly god-awful. But my dreams got even more disturbing. In the latest one, I wasn't able to move at all. I could feel my skin beginning to slough off, my eyes melting in my head, maggots crawling through my rotting flesh. When I woke up, it took me a few moments to blink bleary eyes and realize where I was. I was standing in the door to the garage, sleepwalking, apparently, on my way toward the suitcase. A sudden dread seized me. I was afraid to go near it, to even touch it, certain that if I unzipped it, I'd wind up inside. I rented a hotel room. Of course, it followed me there. At work, my boss swung by my desk to ask if everything was all right. She'd noticed my declining mental state. I broke down and I confessed everything. She asked me what was in the suitcase. I don't know, I stammered. It's not mine. I never looked. You never even looked? She seemed stunned. Isn't that the first thing you should have done? It seemed logical when she said it, but right now, even the idea of opening it all but suffocated me with dread. She said she'd like to see this mysterious suitcase and asked me to show her after work. We drove together to my hotel room. On the way, she theorized what might be in there. Was I being framed? Was there a body? I should have called the police right away, she said. Or was it something more mundane? Maybe someone bought me a frozen turkey and it thawed and was becoming nasty. Maybe a family member was pranking me. Could be anything, and I'd know already if I'd opened the thing. My leaving the mystery for so many days seemed ridiculous to her. I had to agree, but nothing in the world would make me touch that zipper. The suitcase was there, waiting right by the door when we walked in, just tucked to one side like it was ready for me to open it. The entire room stank. My boss wrinkled her nose, and even she looked a little hesitant. She told me to open it, but I shook my head and made a noise in my throat, and she sighed and rolled her eyes and said, "All right, shut the door. We don't want anyone walking by to see." She rolled it into the bathroom in case it was messy and said she'd just open a little, take a peek. "Where did you say it came from again?" she asked as she tugged on the zipper. Dread swirled in my belly. All my limbs felt leaden. I called out again. "Did you unzip it? Did you peek inside yet?" Faint muffled sound. The fear was a stone in the pit of my stomach. Couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Then I heard again what seemed like a smothered cry. I rushed to the bathroom and gasped. Tip of a polished loafer sank into the suitcase, which bulged and trembled, and then the shoe was gone, and the zipper was like lips smacking shut. The suitcase sat, just a suitcase. After that, I took the suitcase with me to the bus and train terminal downtown. It was now lightweight, the slight musty smell. I surveyed the station. There was a woman with small children, father with a teenager in tow, and then I spotted a leathery-faced man in a bucket hat sitting alone on one of the metal chairs, looking a bit worse for wear. I approached him and sat next to him, pretending to read for a few moments, and then I turned to him. "Excuse me, sir," I said. "Would you mind watching my bag for me for a bit?" He looked up at me, surprised, but mumbled, "Sure." "You won't leave it sitting here, will you? Promise me you'll hold on to it until I get back?" I insisted. "Yeah, sure, no biggie. Thanks a million," told him. Then I left. I haven't been back. I'm under investigation for my boss's disappearance since she was last seen in my car, but the nightmares have stopped. The smell is gone. You probably think I'm terrible, but ask yourself, honestly, what would you have done in my situation? I have to issue this warning so that I can prevent others from suffering the same experience. If someone asks you to watch their bag, don't do it. No matter how much social etiquette compels you to smile and agree, make an excuse and leave. Let people look after their own luggage. I know I'm never watching anyone's bag again. Thank you for joining us in the darkness. If you enjoyed these tales, be sure to leave a like, share with fellow horror lovers, and subscribe to Haunting Whispers for more chilling stories. Keep you up at night. Until next time, remember, whispers are never far away.